Hi, today I'm going to be doing my late January wrap up. So let's just talk about all the things that I got to in January because it's too late to talk about these, but I'm gonna anyway. So first I'm going to start off with stats, and I'm doing my stats a little bit differently. I'm going to be showing you some of my story graph stats. So know that half of these graphs came from story graphs and half of them I made with a spreadsheet. So keep that in mind, I guess. I don't know. So the total amount of things I read in January was, I read 13 physical books, but technically it's 14 things because one of the books I read was a bind-up of 2 stories, and usually in the past for this series, which every one of the books is in bind-ups, I usually talk about the bind-up as a whole and the average rating I give them, but because I have pretty drastically different, I mean not drastically different, but I have very separate thoughts on both of the stories in this bind-up. I'm actually going to talk about them separately this time. So my stats for story graph, and honestly all my stats are going to look a little bit off when I show you them because they are counting the bind-up as one book, and I'm counting it as 2 for the purposes of this wrap-up, so I can talk about the books in it separately. Okay, so here's my story graph ratings. I really like the graph. It shows everything very clearly, especially because I use so many different ratings at this point. I use quarter stars and half stars. So I had 1 2-star book this month, 1 2.5 star, 1 2.75 star, 1 3.25 star, and 1 3.75 star. And then here's where it gets a little weird. I had 4 4-star books counting one of the books in that bind up, and then 3 4.25 stars because I'm not the third 4.25 star is the average of that bind up, and I'm not counting that for this wrap up. And then I had 2 4.5 stars because one of the books in the bind up was my second 4.5 star. Hope that makes sense. Then as for genres, so I have 10 fantasy novels, 1 sci-fi novel, and then I have 3 graphic novels. And for the genres for the graphic novels, 1 of them is fantasy and 2 were sci-fantasy. Honestly, if I really want to be technical about it, the sci-fi I read is also sci-fantasy. So really I read 11 fantasies and 3 sci-fantasies. I could have just said that. I'm making this way too complicated. As for age ranges I read 11 adult things, 2 young adult things, and 1 middle grade. In terms of mediums, I read 1 ebook, which was an ARC. I read 2 audiobooks and 10 physical books. And as I said, of the books, I read 3 graphic novels. One of the books I read was a novella, and then the other remaining were novels. Okay, and now I'm also going to do a little something new with my wrap-ups. I'm actually going to talk to you about my DNFs, because I figured when I'm doing this thing with my TBR, where I'm pulling things out of a cup, I realize that you don't know if I finished them or what I thought of them unless I finish them. And I don't want you to think that I just, didn't read some of my mug books. See my January TBR or my February TBR video if you are curious about the mug books. So I'm going to start talking about my DNFs. So I had 4 DNFs this month. I'm really trying hard not to finish or continue reading books that are not interesting me past a certain point. Pretty much the things that will make me put down a book is if I literally am interested but just don't have time for it. There were a couple of those this month. Or if I really don't like an audiobook and I want to read it in a different format. That happened this month. So studies apparently show that 50 pages is enough to tell whether you like a book or not. So that kind of works for me. I've noticed that in my reading, if I'm going to be into a book, it's usually going to happen within the first 50 pages. So I'm really trying hard not to continue reading past that 50 pages if it's not going to happen. And then the other way I know whether I should DNF a book is if I'm reading it and it's taking me just forever to get through. I go whole days without picking it up, and I don't have there's some books where I'm just so busy that I don't pick it up for several days, but then if I have the chance to do it and I just consistently don't, I try not to finish those books now. So I have 4 DNFs because of that. So the first book I DNF'd was 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Haro. This was the book that I pulled out of my fantasy mug. It was not for me, I could already tell. So it was very odd. I don't want to talk too much about it, but it was just very odd, several things about it. It was historical. It was taking place in America, but it didn't really feel like America. It had this weird, the fantasy aspects had already come into the story and I didn't get very far in it, but they were very boring. They were written in the most clinical, boring way ever. And I was just oh my God, can we get to the beautiful fairy tale-esque portal fantasy stuff that I know Alex E. Haro can do? and we never did in the time that I read. I think I got like 10% through, and it was just not happening. This is one of those books that I literally didn't pick up for several days, and I didn't get very far in because I just couldn't. I don't like her writing style. I thought that it was very weird. Another very weird thing is I'm pretty sure that the character is supposed to be a person of color, but the way she's treated is very weird. So she's being raised by white people, and they're like, oh no, you're not a person of color. And so it's like, okay, is this a cultural thing? Like, they see person of color as another word for black, and she's not black, she's something else. Or is she literally like a different race from another world? Like, and her skin is orange? Because that's what they call her skin. They call her skin orange. And I'm like, whose skin is orange? I didn't like it. It was very weird. I DNF'd it. Then the next DNF I had was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and this is one that I'm going to come back to. I got literally like a few seconds into the audiobook, and I didn't like the narrator, like a minute or two in, and I was like, I'll just read it physically. I have the physical copy. When Mason's done with it, I will read it physically. I was going to use the audiobook so that we could buddy read it, but he never got to it, and I didn't want to read that audiobook, so rain check on that one. Next one I DNF'd, I actually got quite a bit of the ways through. It was Of Sea and Shadow by Will White. So this series is very interestingly written. It's kind of two series that are happening simultaneously, and there's 3 books in each, and they both follow different characters on either sides of the same conflict. So I started with the sea, the sea thread of this 2-part series. Of Sea and Shadow is the first one in that, and Of Shadow and Sea, which is the first and the other thread, were both on Audible Plus for free until February 8th. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and read both of these before February 8th, like, obviously. And so I tried with Of Sea and Shadow, and I got to 60% of the way until I just realized, like, I didn't care enough. Like, I didn't care enough about these characters. I didn't care enough about the plot. I didn't think the action was very fun. Like, it just wasn't really entertaining to me, and it was gonna be like a low 3-star, if that. So I was just like, nah, and DNF'd it. And then my last DNF is more of a rain check as well. So this one was Dune, and Dune is one that actually did grab me within 50 pages. I read 50-ish pages of it, and I was interested. I wanted to read it. But Dune is so big, and I am so busy that, like, it's not an easy book to read right now, so I don't have the time. I could not do it. That's the only reason why I didn't read Dune right now. Okay, and now we can talk about the books I actually did finish. So, I go from the order of my least favorite to my most favorites, and this is gonna be interesting. My only 2-star of the month is The Gunslinger by Stephen King. One of my least favorite things I've ever had the displeasure of reading. I hated this book so much, y'all. I'm reading the series with my boyfriend. It's like his favorite series, and even he, like, everyone says this book is not good, and I agree. It's not good. It's just not good. I don't know what else to say about it other than that. It was weird. So it was kind of a quiet book, and there were times where Stephen King's writing was very good. However, the characters have, like, nothing to them at this point, and weird backstories that it kind of jumps to with no warning, so it's kind of very hard to parse that for me. Roland, our main character, we just sort of watch him as he's traveling and chasing after this man in black. We don't know who he is, don't know what he is, so we don't know much about, like, why he's doing this. What is the man in black? Like, what is the problem with him? Is Roland trying to solve a problem? What did he do to him? We don't know any of that in this book, so I wasn't convinced or anything. I wasn't on the journey with him with any stakes in his journey whatsoever. And then this book is riddled with Stephen King-isms. So weird crap happens all over the place that is, like, I don't know, weirdly sexual or violent in a weird way. And, like, I don't know. It just was so odd. So odd. And then the parts where he has plot, it's all this very, like, weird metaphysical stuff happening, and I just was so not interested. I was so bored by this book. I finished it very quickly because I could not stand to be reading it any longer. If I had my way, I would DNF the series right now. Like, I have no desire to go into the next book, but I told Mason I'd give a couple more books a try, but I can't promise that I'm going to ever finish the series. Especially, I know some of the things that are coming in the next 3 books, and I'm not looking forward to them. I'm not looking forward to it. So, we'll see. 2 stars. On to my 2.5 star. Okay, this is Midas by Ryan North, I believe. And this is like a bind up of like a, I don't know, comic that came out. And it's very interesting conceit, bad way it was written for me. I didn't really like it. So we start with this prequel of the book, which is pretty much starts with Midas, King Midas from Greek mythology, like wanting to turn, he makes a wish to turn that everything he touches will turn to gold. And it's kind of like a thought experiment. Okay, what if that happened, but everything that was gold touches also turned to gold? And so pretty much not only the things touching him are turning to gold, but everything that is touching what he was touching, and everything that was touching that, and everything that was touching that. The curse is like moving through everything because everything is touching something, you know? And so pretty much you get to the entire world, all of Earth, being turned into gold. So pretty much everyone is instantly killed, everything is instantly frozen and turned into gold. And so that's kind of the prequel for this. And we follow this crew who wants to figure out why, because they feel like some weapon or something must have detonated. And so they want that so that they can try and replicate it and use it against this kind of insidious empire, I guess. The problem is, I mean, there's lots of problems with this, honestly. Like, it was not good. I was recommended this by a librarian because I was trying to find like fun, fast-paced graphic novels for a couple of my students, and I hated it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so not fun, or this is so bad. Like, I don't know. The characters have nothing to them. What they want to do is not like justified enough. Like, you clearly see the Empire is like bad later, but like you don't see that at first. There's like a talking dinosaur with a world of dinosaurs. And the dinosaur thing isn't bad. It just is like, it's so weird. Like, it was just so random. And I don't know, the crew was really bad. People made stupid decisions. Like, there was a weird slug creature who was like an ex of this human. And I was like, what? I hated it. I hated it. It was very sci-fantasy, which is not a bad thing in itself. I actually liked some sci-fantasy that I read later in the month. I didn't like this one. I thought it was bad. So that I gave it 2.5 stars. My 2.75 star, this is an unpopular opinion, Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So I don't fully, okay, I do know why I gave this 2.75 stars, and I didn't love it. I didn't really like this. I think it was below average. That's kind of what a 2.75 means for me. Like, it's below average book. Pretty much, this book is like a Norse-inspired world, and that was probably the best thing about it, because if you are familiar with Norse mythology like I am, you will see a lot of the echoes of it. Not even in the necessarily, like, you're not seeing like straight deities from Norse mythology like Odin, but you are seeing kind of deities inspired by them. So there was someone who reminded me of Mimir, which is like this wise head that hangs over a well that you can go and get advice from. Like, there was a character like that. There was someone who was more like Fenrir or Loki. And so it was very cool to kind of see that, in my opinion. And then there were also all these little creatures, which I absolutely love, like creatures from the folklore and mythology. Like, to me, like, the gods and stuff are mythology, and I haven't seen very much Norse like folklore creatures explored, and so it was really interesting to see those spirits in here. The problem is with them, and this annoyed me a lot actually, but we'll get into like the real big structural problems with the book and why it didn't work for me in a bit. But this was like something that was really annoying. The creatures are not widely known to everyone, and they are so poorly described, I could not physically picture them. Like, there was this weird rat thing that like I would have loved to have seen, and I couldn't, because John Gwynne couldn't describe it for the life of him. And I think that's somewhat because, like, folklore, you know, is really hard to describe it, and Norse folklore is not really as well known. But, like, can we at least, like, help our readers see it? Like, please, that's all I'm begging for. Anyways, that's a nitpick, more of a nitpick thing. What I really didn't love about this, so I didn't love the characters. I didn't connect to any of the characters. So we follow 3 different characters, and their plots all start at various points in the book, and honestly, their plots, I couldn't see for the life of me where they were going, why they were connected, why we were doing anything that we were doing, and that's a big problem for me as well. But we're following Orca, who's this, like, mother and a wife who has, like, kind of some of the worst things happen to her, and that's kind of where her plot starts, but those things don't happen until, like, 150 pages into the freaking book. And so it's time to get invested in her, but I thought she would have been more interesting. It had something else happen instead, because she was so, like, one-track mind and so, like, not complex of a character, in my opinion, that she needed more people around her to kind of calm her, or like get her dynamic to be interesting. Because as of right now, she was very like one-track mind, which is not bad. It just doesn't make for as interesting of a character. I will say the thing she's has a one-track mind about did make me sympathetic to her. I don't even think those emotions were written very well. Like, they weren't very well explored, in my opinion. Like, I don't think this is a character book at all. This is very much a plot-driven, action-driven book. And there's two other characters which no one talks about because they don't know how to freaking describe them, because they don't do anything. One of them's named Varg, and he's like he joins this like band of like Vikings or mercenaries or whatever, that don't really work for a king. They work for themselves. And that's pretty much it for him. And then you also have a woman who is a part of this band that does work for a noble woman or noble man. You don't really know what they're doing or what the point is until you get a bit into it, but essentially a lot of this revolves around descendants of the gods, because the gods, the Norse gods, had something similar to a Ragnarok, so it's gone. All the gods are dead, except for like a couple, and they're not here in the world really anymore. The plot kind of revolves around the descendants that still are here. This is a very action-packed book, and action's not really my thing. I read for character interactions, I read for slower or like more political maneuverings, or more military campaigns, less like kind of petty hand-to-hand battle, like nonstop. And that's kind of what this was. Like, they're kind of roving Viking bands, and so it gave me kind of Kings of the Wild vibes, if you kind of liked that vibe. Like, here might be a darker version of it. And I didn't like Kings of the Wild either, so this just was really not for me. And I'm really sad because the sequel comes out this year and it has such a beautiful cover, but in my opinion, this was not as good as it could have been. But this one just really wasn't for me. I could see it working for a lot of people. It clearly has. But the kind of things that it was doing are just not things that I liked really at all. Okay, the next one I read on audio, and that is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is my 3.25 star. So I liked this. So unlike Shadow of the Gods, which it's 2.75 star because, oops, it's slightly below average, The Blade Itself is 3.25 because it's slightly above average. I didn't have no feelings on it, and I didn't have like slight negative feelings. I had somewhat positive feelings, like not like super positive, like it's not a 4-star or anything like that, but it is like a 3.25 star. So I was like, oh, okay, like there's things I like about this. Blade Itself, I'm not going to go into what it's about because no one can really tell you, including me. And it's Joe Abercrombie. Everyone knows Joe Abercrombie, like even if you haven't read him. It's grimdark, and everyone talks about Glokta, the characters. And I will say the character work is very well done. To me though, or at least most of them are really well done. Like, to me, there are some characters in here who like have like very not interesting or complex personalities. Dogman, looking at you. I don't know that that's a super unpopular opinion. No one likes him from what I can tell. But there were others who I was really very interested in, and pretty much we have several different perspectives who are all very, like, they are separate perspectives with separate stories, and they all kind of end up in the same place at the end, but their plots still aren't super intertwined because the Blade itself doesn't really have a plot. That's one of the issues for me. I tend to need a bit more plot in stories, even in character-driven stories. I also tend to like, instead of like character studies where it's really about the character's mind, like only their mind, I really like to learn about characters from character interactions. And so a lot of it was, you could learn about the characters from character interactions, but to me, they weren't really about the interactions themselves. They were about showing you more about the character, if that makes sense. Like when Glokta is doing his Inquisitor thing, it's not like, oh my gosh, look at his relationship with this person, look at how he interacts here. Like it's very much not about the other person at all. It's very much about like, look at Glokta doing Glokta's thing. And that's not the way I prefer to get character interactions, I think. And then characters, so I liked some of them. My favorite is Logan Ninefingers, because he kind of reminds me of some characters from Stormlight that might be a little bit blasphemous to those of you who love Joe Abercrombie and don't love Stormlight as much. But he reminded me of Dalinar. If what Sanderson was doing with Dalinar and like Oathbringer was kind of done like a cutesy way, like less cutesy way, and it was more like dark and brutal, and like kind of how this sort of idea, which I can't really tell you what it is because it's it's a spoiler, would be explored. There is, like, everything in Stormlight feels a little bit like it has rose-tinted glasses over it, and I like that. Like, I'm fine with that. But I can understand that, like, Grimdark and, like, Joe Abercrombie is not trying to do that at all. And so I can appreciate that Logan feels more, like, real, and his struggles feel a lot dark. And the things that he has to do, that it shows him doing or talks about him doing, are a lot darker than what we see from Dalinar. The other characters I'm not really fussed about, to be honest. So there's Baez, and there's his little apprentice who's in, what's his face? Logan's perspective, and I like them. Their plot, they don't really have a plot, but I've heard in book 2 they have more of one, which will be interesting if I, agree. Then Glokta is a well-written character. He just doesn't connect with me very much. Like, I am not, like, loving him. I think he's very well-written, but that's about it. And his whole plot was not interesting very much to me. Jezal was kind of interesting. He's kind of like this snot-nosed rich kid, and, like, kind of similar to Adolin in Stormlight, but if Adolin was actually a snot-nosed kind of bratty jerk, like, that he might look a little bit like Jezal. So him being a jerk and stupid, and seeing in his perspective how people, like, think of him, even though he can't entirely see, was kind of interesting. I did like his part, probably the second best after Logan's. And then there was Pharaoh and what's his name? Yulwei. Their part didn't do much for me, and Dogman's I actively disliked. So the other thing I realized with this, that's 5 perspectives, and I didn't even talk about one. There's 6 perspectives. If you're gonna have that many perspectives, I either need to, A, love all the characters. Stormlight did that. I love all the perspectives. Or I need to see why the perspectives are related to each other, and some need to emerge as, like, the perspectives that are the main characters. And I think they do. So Jezal, Logan, and especially Glokta emerge as our 3 mains, in my opinion, from the Blade itself. The other thing is missing. They don't feel connected. They're not at all connected at all in this book, and I just don't see why I'm following them for a good bit of it. Like, the Jasmine Throne did a really cool thing with me where it had 5 perspectives and I cared about 3 of them, but even the ones I didn't care about, I could see why their perspectives were relevant or would be relevant, so that worked for me. And the Blade itself, because it feels so aimless, didn't as well for me. But I will stop talking about the Blade itself, because it's not a review just on the Blade itself. Let's continue to my 3.75 star, and that is Tidesong by Wendy Xu. So this one I actually read twice. And the second time I actually read it in February, technically, but I'm not counting it for twice for the year. I'm not counting it in my February wrap-up. I'm counting it as one read. So I read it, I bought it and read it to vet it for middle schoolers, because I wanted to have this in my classroom, but also I thought this would be really good for some of the kids that I taught. I thought they would really like it. It's been compared to Studio Ghibli, and while these kids I found out hadn't seen Studio Ghibli, they do like anime and manga, so I thought that this might scratch that itch. I got to read it. I was fortunate enough to read it with one of those students, and after I had already read it, and the first time I read it, I got very little out of it. It was like a 3.5 maybe. It was like, okay, that was cute. That's it. Reading it with my student really changed my opinion on this, because we had so much fun together reading it, and I was able to go slower and really appreciate things. I think that when I sometimes rush through books like this, like graphic novels, or even through like children's books, I'm finding, I'll talk about that in February's wrap-up though, even like short novellas or audiobooks, I find that I would be better suited to slowing down. And so I think that's how I'm going to approach graphic novels and children's books in the future, because as we read this over like maybe 2 weeks or something, it was very spotty when we could read it, and we had such a good time. Like, I had like a newfound appreciation for all of the details and the things that this author made sure to do with the art and with the story and the themes that just I thought were really appropriate. This is the middle grade I read, so it's like aimed towards middle graders, and I thought the themes of how this kid was feeling like they're not good enough, having negative self-talk and intrusive thoughts, like telling you you're not good at everything, you're not good at anything, you're not good for your family, people don't love you, that sort of thing I found it very like relatable and poignant for middle schoolers. And I think the way the art showed that was really great. My student and I got such joy out of seeing all the creatures There's these adorable little chickens. Let me see if I can find them. And they have like teeth, and it is so cute. And then what this did with magic I thought was really nice. And also, oh, is that a chicken? Yep, there's the chickens. There's the chickens with teeth. I love them. And what this did with magical creatures, there were so many cute little creatures. There was like a little kelpie that looked like a little frog, and there were dragons. It was just so good, and I had just had such a newfound appreciation for it, and so I bumped it up to 3.75 because it was just so good. It gave me Tea Dragon vibes, which is originally why this was put on my radar for me, because I love the Tea Dragons, and I was like, this may be like that. And when I read it, because I then started thinking of it as someone I could read for students, and read it for just myself, I wasn't a big fan. And then reading it with students, I really did get those Tea Dragon vibes, and I think I was able to slow down and appreciate it a lot more. And that just makes me really happy that I got to read this and experience this. I should have told you what it's about, because I actually do recommend this one. So this one, in just a very brief summary, we have a girl who wants to learn magic at the school, so she goes to prepare for her audition for the school at her grandmother's house, or not her grandmother, her aunt's house. Her grandmother and mother sent her to the grandmother's sister, her great aunt, to learn magic, because her great aunt and her cousin, I believe, are really adept at the family magic of like calling water and air and dragons and things. But she doesn't seem to be very good at it, and accidentally her magic becomes entwined with a dragon accidentally. And it was just so cute. It dealt with lots of things, like lots of themes about family and the things that families teach you, and hereditary knowledge and magic and things like that. It was just so good. I definitely recommend it. 3.75 stars. This is the first one, so our first book that I'm going to talk about where my thoughts are overall positive. Okay, on to my 4 stars. The first one is in the Bindup Era of Novron, which is right over here. Can you see it? Yeah, right here. The third and final bind-up of the final 2 books of the Reindeer Revelation series. So this is a 6-book series that's published in 3 different volumes. I have the first one right here, Theft of Swords, and I have the third one. I don't have the second one yet. But I just really liked this one. I really liked Wintertide. Before this, my thoughts had been sort of mixed on this series. I gave the first book in Theft of Swords, The Crown Conspiracy, 4.25 stars. I was really pleased with it. And then the second one I was less pleased with, but I still think it's objectively better than some of the others. Of Impartha, I gave 3.75 stars. And then in Rise of Empire, I had 2 of my more least favorite ones. My least favorite one is actually book 3 in the series, Nifron Rising. It was very like neutral for me. And then the second one in that one is called The Emerald Storm, and I really, really liked it until the ending kind of threw some things off for me, so I gave it 3.5. And then Wintertide was better. It kind of was a bit of a return to form for me. It kind of softened some of the things that I didn't love about the ending of The Emerald Storm, and I just really liked it. I do think that maybe with this series, reading them physically was better for me. I think his other books I've had a good time reading on audio, but Rise of Empire I read on audio, and the other 2, so these 2 I read physically, so I do think that has worked better for me historically with this series. I could just keep up with things with Wintertide better, and it was very short. It was just very good. And there was the introduction of some dynamics that I was like, this is interesting. Is it gonna go anywhere? I don't know. And then it ended with a unexpected bang. And it wasn't, like, there were definitely things about this that weren't my favorite, including some of the things with the ending, and so that's why it's like a 4-star. I think this book got pretty dark, in ways that I wasn't super loving. Just some tropes I didn't love, but it was pretty good. I give it 4 stars. Then my next favorite 4-star, or my next least, I don't know. The second 4-star I have is Light from Uncommon Stars by Ryka Aoki. So this is a sci-fantasy book. It is a release from 2021 that I wanted to get to. It's a very odd premise. So we basically have this woman who is like this violin teacher who has taught some of the greatest violinists. So what she does in order to get her own ability to play violin back from the devil, she sacrifices these violin players. And so she needs her 7th and final violin player to sacrifice their soul. And so she picks this trans girl named Katrina, and she is a runaway. She's had a really hard life. There's some very like graphic kind of details of abuse and like sexual assault in the beginning of this book, so I would go in with a little bit of like wariness with that. And I was a little worried because that relationship seems very predatory, but honestly it was actually very like sweet. And yeah, it was a bit more complex than it seemed. And the way that the book kind of offset what sounds really bad about that relationship was actually pretty good. And then there's also Lan Tran, I believe, who is this woman who owns a donut shop, and she and her family have come from another galaxy, I believe, and they're kind of refugees. So they are set up here because something bad was happening to their homeland, and so these characters meet, and there's a cute little sapphic romance between some middle-aged women, and it's about like very found family, very much, it's very like healing and sweet story, even though it did have some graphic stuff towards the beginning, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it really stuck with me. So Wintertide, the reason it isn't above this, even though I originally thought it might be, is because this book definitely stuck with me plot-wise and character-wise a bit more than Wintertide did. Like, I actually have trouble remembering the difference between Wintertide and the final book in Era of Novron, even though I had very strong feelings about the final book. So yeah, something about this really stuck with me, and I really enjoyed it. So 4 stars. Okay, the next one is my arc that I read. So I got this arc on NetGalley, and I think it was already out when I read it, but I still had it on NetGalley, and that is Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan McGuire. I really liked this one, and no one was more surprised than me, honestly, because I have had a rocky relationship with this series. There's some books that I absolutely adore, like Down Among the Sticks and Bones or Beneath the Sugar Sky, and then there's others that I was okay with, had mixed feelings about, like Every Heart a Doorway or Come Tumbling Down, and then there were others that I didn't like at all, namely In an Absent Dream. And this one was really good. It was the 3rd highest I've rated a Wayward Children series book, and I didn't have high hopes for it because the main character follows. I found her quite annoying in some of the other books that I've seen her in, but I actually liked her in this book, and I thought her struggles were really kind of realistic and well written, and I do think that the writing was a lot, I don't know, it was very clean and nice in this book, and I don't think Seanan McGuire has an issue with that, but sometimes her themes like don't fully show it because I don't think she fully carries them out all the way in all of her books. This one had some nice themes. It had some nice atmosphere despite being in our world. It had some really like kind of darker ideas explored in it, and a kind of a darker situation that our main character was in, and it was just really good. So it's about this girl named Cora, and basically due to the events of Come Tumbling Down, which is the last book we saw her and her crew in, she wants to leave the school they're at for children who have come from different worlds. Like, they lived in our world and they went to their own personal like fantasy world, and they came back like not by choice. And so Cora, after this quest that she went on in book 5, she wants to leave the school and go somewhere that can help her forget. And this school is very sinister, and that was part of what made it so good. Like, it made Cora and all the other characters very sympathetic, and it made the plot very, very good. It made the atmosphere very nice, and it just made me very invested in getting them out of the school, but also seeing what was so bad about it. And I don't know, it just had a good balance of all of that. And so I really enjoyed this one. I have a full review because I reviewed it for NetGalley and stuff, so I will link that down below for my Goodreads. Okay, my final 4-star. I think it's my favorite 4-star, and that is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So this one was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Despite so the beginning I wasn't sure if I would. So it was cozy. It was very nice to read, even though it was very sad. Like, I did have a really like cozy time kind of reading this. But I was worried because I know, like, I've tried this before. The writing style was so dense I couldn't do it. And so I put it down, and I'm so glad I came back to this. I see the hype for Robin Hobb. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was cozy. I thought the plot, even though like this doesn't have too much of a plot, but it does have kind of one, and it resolves itself in this book. And I thought that was really good. I thought Fitz's character was beautifully written and just so interesting to follow, and I was really invested in his story. I really enjoyed the writing. I really enjoyed the pacing, how Rob and Hobb kind of took us through the story. It's very kind of slow, but a bit steady. It was very tragic at times. But I really enjoyed this. I was really impressed. By the end, I don't know, I just felt like I'd gone on this like really, really complete and full journey of the first part, like the coming of age of Fitz's life, and it was really good. I'm super excited to get to the others in the series now. On to my 4.25 stars. So the first one is a graphic novel I read because I was looking for graphic novels to read with some kids, and that was Superman Smashes the Klan by Luen Young, I think. I don't remember the author's name, I'm very sorry, but I really, really like this book. It's like a retelling and like a redrawing of this older comic from like the 60s or something. It's about Superman who it's kind of looks at immigration through the eyes of Superman, because Superman is kind of a refugee from like an alien refugee sort of, and he is a superhero, but in this book you kind of realize he's like holding back his truth of being like an alien, and so you kind of see him being Superman while grappling with that. At the same time, this Chinese American family, I believe, moves into a like neighborhood with a lot of white people, and it's the 60s, I believe, so people are pissed, or like 40s maybe, I don't know. It's a past time in American history, maybe 50s, and people were pissed that they were there, and racists got loud. And so you kind of see many forms of racism. You see like microaggressions from day to day, people who wanted to be friends with these kids. You see how these kids react to that, because they react in very different ways. Our main character reacts with like a lot of anger and is like, why did you just say that to us? Whereas the other kind of makes a joke out of it to sort of fit in. And then you also see kids who are like more openly racist. You see how racism kind of passes down in families. You see racism from people of color towards Black people. So you see anti-Blackness within the Asian community in particular, which was really interesting. You also see like full-on like white supremacist KKK, and that is the Klan that is referenced in the title. It's about like kind of, it's like a very satisfying, a bit of a takedown of the Klan, and it just looks at racism in a very like nuanced light for a superhero book. Like all the things I mentioned are there, but then there's a lot of talk about like there are people who benefit at the top in like monetary ways from like racism and white supremacy of like the lower class almost. So it kind of tied that in. It was very, and it also talked about how like racism is kind of used as like a kind of a ploy almost to sort of get people like united around a certain cause and like doing what you want, because people are very easily manipulated when they're emotionally kind of driven with hate. It was just so complex and just so fun, because one thing I also love about Superman and DC and superheroes in general is it does sort of feel like they can solve problems that we are still dealing with, and it is a little bit of wishful thinking. And like racism isn't solved. Like I don't think this is a Superman solves racism thing, but it is like a case of the Klan getting it. I don't know, it's just so refreshing to be back with like Clark Kent and Superman and this like the cheesy stuff like with the identity and Lois and the investigations and getting these kids involved. There's just so much about this that I adored. So 4.25 stars. The next 4-star is The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. I read a T. Kingfisher book before, and honestly I wasn't super fussed with it. I like tried to be really, really nice to it and rated it really highly, but it's more of a 3-star, I know. And The Raven and the Reindeer was a big step up for me. It was also more my speed of a type of book. And this is a retelling of the Snow Queen. It's pretty short, it's very sweet, and it really fleshes out that story. So it very much is the Snow Queen retold very closely, except with a few added things that make it so much better. So we flesh out the magic and the fairy tale-esque-ness of the world. We flesh out this relationship that the main character, even in the original Snow Queen, has. Like, she, not a relationship like a romantic relationship, which is what it is here, but she meets some people on her journey, and we really like kind of stop over and like meet them in this book. And one of them she has a sapphic relationship with, and the addition of these characters added just a whole new dynamic, and the commentary that T. Kingfisher was able to kind of put in here about gender and like friendships and just so many things was just such a nice touch. Like, it was just so good. I really, really, really enjoyed this. And then there was also another relationship from the Snow Queen, which a lot of people, including myself, had issues with. And that relationship was changed in this book. And in a way that was like very relatable to me. And I think will be relatable to a lot of people. And I just highly recommend this, man. It is so freaking good. It was just this like cozy sort of fairy tale that had like a really funny, sassy talking crow and like a really nice, like fairy tale-esque, like feeling with great magic and a really cute relationship and like characters that I cared about them. Like I did care about them. And it was just really good. And after this, I'm super excited to read more T. Kingfisher. This was so good. I really enjoyed this. And then my last 4.25 star, I actually read 3 Ryka books this month by Michael J. Sullivan. I read The Era of Novron, and then later in the month I read The Crown Tower, which is the first in the Ryka Chronicles. And this was so good. 4.25 stars. It was amazing. This is like a prequel series, the beginning of a prequel series that Michael J. Sullivan's talked about maybe having 12 books in, like one book for each year that Royce and Hadrian being partners before the Ryka Revelation starts. And so I'm fully on board. Michael J. Sullivan, please write 12 books in the series. Like, I will read them all. We currently have 4. I will read every single one of them. And I just so enjoyed this book. Like, it was so fun. So I was worried with this one because you kind of know the story of how Royce and Hadrian are kind of put together and their first mission a little bit from Ryka Revelations. And I think I was worried that like it would just be like, I already know this, like you can't surprise me. But Michael J. Sullivan, I think, knew that. And so he made it so freaking good. We start, and we don't even start with the like putting them together, the mission. We talk about like, we get to like Hadrian going to meet Royce, or like answering this call where he will eventually meet Royce. And there's this like kind of closed circle mystery for like the first maybe fourth of a book. And then you kind of have Royce and Hadrian kind of not getting on, stumbling through their first mission and kind of like having real problems with each other. And then you get their mission, their mission of 2 parts. And you see them kind of developing respect for each other and like a slight friendship, and their banter was just so good in this book. It was their dynamic was so good. Seeing Royce mean and sassy was my favorite thing, because Royce is pretty you get the sense that Hadrian tames him a little bit, just a tiny bit. And this is Royce with none of that. Like, no bars, like, no, what is it? No bars, holes, or I don't know what the saying is. But anyways, this is Royce with no filter. He will be as mean to you as he can, and I love him for that. And then it's funny to see them kind of slowly get this, like, friendship going, and The Crown Tower was just so good. I'm currently reading The Rose and Thorn, and it was so good. Oh, and the other thing I loved about The Crown Tower, I completely forgot. We get Gwynne. We get a whole perspective with Gwynne. And I was wondering if we would bring back some of the characters from the first series and see their prequels. And we saw Gwynne. And this made me love Gwynne. Like, I think Gwynne didn't always have the most fleshed out character in the first series, but I absolutely loved her in this one. I loved what she stood for. I loved what she did. I loved Gwynne. I loved this book. 2 more books. So The Girl in the Tower is my first 4.5 book, and I really enjoyed this. I gave The Bear and the Nightingale 5 stars, and it was on my favorites of last year. This is a 4.5 stars. It was a little bit of a step down, and I think that's because I still love Vasya. I still thought the plot was good and very well written. I love the setting and everything, but Bear and the Nightingale just had such a small Russian secluded town forest vibe where the Russian spirits are very strong, and we're in Moscow in this one, so we aren't in a place where those Russian folklore I loved vibes are there. So that was kind of what I was missing from this book. I wanted that more of that, but this was less of that, and it was more Moscow kind of politics and plot, and I did enjoy those, just not as much as the folklore quiet vibes. But Vasya was as wonderful as ever, making mistakes, taking names, being wonderful. And I think the plot was really good, and you start to get some answers, and especially in hindsight, like I do really appreciate this book. Like I had a good time reading it. Like it wasn't a chore. So 4.5 stars it is. It's like not a favorite, but it is still really good. And I'm reading The Winter of the Witch right now, and I can tell you that one is phenomenal. So this will probably be my least favorite in the series, but still really good. And then my final book of the month. Gosh, I've been talking forever, and I have 3 more videos to film. Persepliquis, the second of the books in Era of Novron, and the conclusion to the Reindeer Revelation series. Michael J. Sullivan didn't have to do this book. Like, he could have just been a good writer. He could have written a good series with a good conclusion, because that's what he was writing for me. And then he had to go and make it great, and I respect him for that. There are still things that, like, people, like, think, like, plot things that people have pointed out were kind of stupid, and I'm like, yeah, I agree. Like, Leanna, in particular, from Leanna's Library, has, like, pointed out that, like, yeah, there's some stupid plot things, and, like, I agree. But this book had the, like, rompy quest vibes that I loved so much in The Crown Conspiracy, the first in Theft of Swords, and I hadn't really seen in the 4 middle books, because they were more focused on, like, politics. But this was, like, classic fantasy rompy quest, D&D, maybe, vibes, with reveals that rival freaking Brandon Sanderson, and just relationships and banter, and a questing group that I loved. Myron. I loved this book. I loved this crew. And then there was a romance as well that I was rooting for that kind of started in, like, I don't know, Rise of Empire era, maybe? And I was like, this isn't like a romance. Like, this is just like, that's not what this is it? And then Michael J. Sullivan said, yes, it is. And I was like, this is what I never knew I needed. And I loved it. I was rooting for a couple for, like, the first time in a long time. And then to see one particular character who, from, like, Avenpartha on, has had a really difficult time. Like, her story has been very, very compelling to me because she's just been struggling so much. Seeing her really come into her own in this one was so wonderful to see. Seeing, like, Royce and Hadrian be in the positions they're in and still have this, like I feel like their bond is on full display in this one in a way it maybe wasn't in the others. I loved it so much. This was such a good conclusion. This was my favorite book of the month. It's a 4.5 star just because I still think there were some things that, like, it wasn't, like, perfect, you know? But it was wonderful, and it put Reindeer Revelations on my favorite series list, even though I had kind of mixed reviews with it. Like, some of them were a little bit middling ratings, because Reindeer Revelations has one of those endings that makes you see the rest of it differently, in my opinion. At least that's what it did with me, and I adored that. So 4.5, one of my favorite series. I've been talking nonstop about this series on my Discord, to my boyfriend, to everyone in my life, and please talk to me about it on the Discord because I am in love. I am going through the Reindeer Chronicles right now and loving that. I've been collecting the Legends of the First Empire series because I am fully committed to reading a Michael J. Sullivan book a month now. Like, I was already thinking about doing that because, like, it fit. But now I'm even more, like, committed to that. Like, I thought it was going to be a little bit of a chore. But nope, I am in love. So I'm so excited to continue with his world and his books. I'm so impressed. These are some of the books that I read in the month of January. Let me know if you've read any of these books and talk to me about them in the comments. If you don't want to leave a comment, but you want to leave an emoji, if there is a fish emoji, leave one of those because there's a fish on Light from Uncommon Stars, and also there's sea dragons in Tidesong. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!